and I'll be admitting participants. Good luck, guys.
Good afternoon, at least here in Eastern time. Good afternoon from Pittsburgh. This is IC 25, What Could Go Wrong? Evaluating Wheeled Mobility Adverse Events with an HRO Approach. Kendra Betz is the speaker. Take it away, Kendra.
Thank you, Rachel. And thanks to everybody for joining this afternoon or early morning or late at night, whatever it might be. And welcome to all of you who might be watching this at a later time by recording. Thank you for joining us. Jumping right in, we're going to talk about this topic of what could go wrong, evaluating wheeled mobility adverse events with an HRO approach. This morning during the plenary, we talked about HRO as high reliability organizations. And we will do a brief review of some of the content, but not all of that, because a lot of you may have attended the plenary session. It is also available as a recording. So if you didn't get the chance to attend earlier in the day at the live ISS on January 31st, you can watch the recording of the plenary, which really tied in quite nicely. So Rachel, thank you for the brief introduction. I am a physical therapist by background. I have an adjunct faculty position at the University of Pittsburgh in the Department of Rehab Science and Technology. I have enjoyed my career of going on 29 years with the Veterans Health Administration, and I currently work with the VA National Center for Patient Safety. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, but I would like to acknowledge our national program for implementation of high reliability organizations in VHA. And I've been, it's been a privilege to be part of that program, and a lot of the content is kind of extrapolated from what we've been teaching across the country in VA. So a lot of my VA collaborators out there will be familiar with the concepts, and we're going to jump right in and talk about how we can apply high reliability and just culture to the topic of wheeled mobility and seating, which we are also incredibly passionate about. So thank you for joining, and we'll jump right in. In terms of objectives, what do I hope that you will gain from just listening and participating and thinking, hopefully thinking, because I think, in our education, there's no right or wrong answers. There's no black or white. I feel like the best that I can do with my many decades of experience is to just teach people how to think through problems, how to analyze information, how to come up with your own approach. That makes the most sense. And there's never the opportunity to give the answer, but actually to move through topics and data to come up with the solutions that work for you. So we'll go through a quick review of the five foundational characteristics of high reliability organizations. Discuss why reporting actual and near miss events is really important for supporting patient safety relative to our applications of wheeled mobility and seating. To be able to look at the scenarios where those concepts of HRO and just culture can be applied, so that you can walk away and go, I got that. I kind of live and breathe HRO and just culture in my everyday life and work life and everything. Once you get on board, it's kind of hard to ignore. And then I want you to kind of think about what are the types of adverse events that happen and have been reported with wheeled mobility devices and what is possible. So the key question is, what could go wrong? And hopefully as you leave the session today, you'll have that mindset of thinking about what could go wrong and address those issues before there's actually an adverse event and a problem for one of our end users. So again, thanks for joining. In a previous session, we gave a broad background of the implications of implementation of high reliability organization concepts in healthcare. And it's really challenging to avoid this topic if you haven't been made aware or been involved in your work settings with high reliability concepts. Google it and it will pop up. Very specific to healthcare. We have the Joint Commission in the United States heavily involved in advocating for the implementation of our healthcare system as a high reliability organization. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, their logo down in the bottom left, really advocating for developing high reliability organizations and inputs related to advancing quality and safety throughout the United States. The World Health Organization is also involved with emphasizing high reliability as a priority. 3 or 4 years ago, 3 years ago in 2019, there was the 4th Congress on Patient Safety that gathered in Saudi Arabia, and they had representation from over 50 countries. And out of 8 priority themes for the 4-day conference, priority number 2 was the implementation and the advancement of high reliability concepts across the world with all of our healthcare systems. So really exciting to see that being accepted in such a global approach. And then the upper right, this is a document actually that you can download from the internet. You can just Google evidence brief, implementation of high reliability organization principles, something like that. We have a program within the Veterans Health Administration in the United States that will compile all of the published literature on any identified topic. And from my office, the VA National Center for Patient Safety, we actually requested support in gathering all of the evidence to support how do you implement concepts of high reliability in healthcare, and are happy to have this document available for the general public across the world to take a look at what those strategies might be, at least as available through the published literature. It's everywhere. So the 5 characteristics of HRO, again, in the previous session, we talked in depth about the application of these characteristics to wheeled mobility and seating, but just very quickly, we're looking at sensitivity to operations, of really having an understanding of who are the people, who are the stakeholders, who are we supporting, and what are the steps in the process from beginning to end, so that we can understand what might happen from beginning to end and at every point in between. So it's really being aware of processes that are used in healthcare applications throughout the entire continuum of care. The second is preoccupation with failure, and that is being ready for something to go wrong at any time. Really having that laser sharp focus, they call it, at catching errors and identifying what might go wrong and addressing that challenge before it becomes a real issue for a patient or for a client in the cases that we are working with. The third concept is reluctance to simplify, and it really is a concept that we work in complex teams in a complex healthcare system organization, and the clients that we serve have complex needs. And therefore, we have to be reluctant to simplify. Complex problems do not have simple solutions. And when there is an adverse event or an almost adverse event, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it's really important to get to the root cause. What was the root cause or the bottom line that allowed that particular adverse event or near event to occur, so that we can address that systems issue, address that behavior issue, and prevent that topic from being an issue in the future. The fourth is commitment to resilience, and that's really learning from our mistakes. As we go through the session, we will reinforce that everybody will make mistakes, nobody is immune. And the key issue is when an individual makes a mistake or almost made a mistake that was luckily avoided, we learn from those mistakes, we share that information with others, and we bounce back because we are resilient. I think we can all kind of relate to that as we've moved through this global pandemic and this dance with COVID, and learning as information becomes available, we learn from that and we move forward. And finally, deference to expertise. It's really important to acknowledge that there's many members of the team. There are a lot of different players at the table, whether that's an actual table like this podium in front of me, or a virtual table where we're all coming together to share different perspectives. And what's really important is that we keep the individual who requires a wheeled mobility device, seating intervention, at the center of our consideration, so that all of our expertise is being shared with the unique needs and preferences of that individual, always at the center of our considerations. So when we jump into looking at, okay, that quick review, I went through this very quickly, but there's more opportunity to review the details again. But when we look at this list of 5 priorities as characteristics of high reliability, I do think it's really important with the graphic on the right representing the service delivery process in the RESNA service delivery provision guide that's currently being updated. And there is another session during ISS this conference that will provide the highlights of the update to that position paper. So be sure to check out that session and that document. But really looking at all of the steps from the assessment, going through equipment selection and recommendations and trials, considering funding options, procurement, fitting, training, delivery, follow-up, maintenance, repair requirements. We need to be measuring outcomes and taking that full circle, it demonstrates the beginning, a long process with point by point along the way, for which at any point along the way, we can either really excel or we could miss something that could ultimately result in a less than optimal outcome or an adverse event, worst case scenario. So great representation of sensitivity to operations, reluctance to simplify, deference to expertise, and we can weave all of these different characteristics of high reliability right into our established service delivery process. When we look at the review again, it's really important to kind of focus, well, what does this look like in our everyday work? And excuse me, I'm getting over a cough. And I present a fair amount, and I often share a lot of pictures of my clients and people using different wheeled mobility devices. What I wanted to highlight in this slide is that none of these individuals are my clients, but rather these are my colleagues and friends. They are therapists and they are therapists and engineers and researchers who are joining me in evaluating wheeled mobility devices in different types of applications. And really important that we have the ability to not simplify situations, to be preoccupied with failure, to defer to the experts to understand what is going on with each of these different devices and how do we know that they are performing to the level that they are expected to perform, that they are safe, that they are durable, and that they are reliable. So really looking at different applications. And I wanted to share a particular example, and I have this thing going across my screen. I'm not sure how to get rid of that. I don't know what I did. Okay, we're gonna ignore it. So we're gonna look at looking at a scooter evaluation. Rich is gonna see if he can get some help with that. In looking at a brand new scooter, and what I always encourage folks to do, my colleagues, in evaluating equipment is when you go into an actual exhibit hall, so often we're willing to kind of, stand there with hands crossed and look at the equipment and go, yep, that looks good, that looks good. But what's really most important is to get in that device and see how it performs, what the issues might be, what the challenges are that stand out, and how we might resolve them. And this is an example. You have to look closely at the video. I won't overshare to start with, but take a look at this video. And this is a video from behind of a 3-wheeled scooter that is nearly brand new right out of the box. Here's the video. Okay. We'll watch it one more time. Fairly brand new, so outside of the box, been driven by 3 different people, has not been issued to a client. And now I want you to focus on the left rear wheel. And you can see the wobble in that wheel. And what stands out to me here is this is a brand new device that we often assume is coming out of the box and is ready to go to be delivered to a client. And it's important that we take the time to inspect the device, work with our colleagues, our technical support, everyone who brings something to the table to be able to evaluate what's going on with this particular device, and so that we can make a correction. Is there an installation and assembly problem? Is there a malalignment? Is this a device that just isn't going to work well? And depending on the situation, we would address that in different ways. Take a look at those things. All right, so we're going to move right into, we're going to pause one moment.
We're going to just stop and bring it back up again.
Okay, there we go.
Give us 1 second.
That's right. And look at that. Thank you, Rich. Always helpful with everything. Thanks for your patience with that. So we're going to jump right in. I kind of glazed over the 5 characteristics of high reliability organizations. Please review the previous session if you would like more details, because now we're going to move into more of the applications of those pieces and talk about what is a just culture. And what's really important is that organizations that function as high reliability entities must promote and sustain what we call a just culture. And a just culture, it's easier to think about examples and describe it with a definition to describe what it is and what it is not. So I really like this definition from justhealthcare.healthcare on the web, and they provide a nice summary of what just culture is. And I'm going to read this statement. I promise not to read all of my slides, but a just culture requires establishment of a psychologically safe environment where individuals trust that they can and should report errors without blame. When errors are reported, they should be explored organizationally as a learning opportunity and examined for operational components that can be improved. So the key elements there is that when you work in a fair and just culture, you are encouraged to bring forth mistakes, bring forth errors, bring forth concerns like this wheel's about to fall off, and address those issues in whatever method is most appropriate so that we prevent harm from occurring, we manage harm that has occurred, and we are looking to the future to prevent a similar issue from happening. It's also important to look at what is the opposite of that. And this is a great, I want to get rid of this one type of thing. How do I get rid of that, Rich? And I'm trying to get rid of the bottom. Sorry, guys. Yeah, there we go. I'm not able to read some of my quotes. And I'll go through it. I can survive it. In a punitive environment, people only report what they cannot hide. And that was from Lucian Leap out of Harvard School of Public Health, where it's a true exploration where in a culture that is not fair, not just, not supportive, you have a punitive environment where people hide their mistakes because they're not comfortable and they're not willing to share those for fear of retribution, fear of punishment, fear of worst case being fired. And so that becomes a challenge. And so we really want to move forward with promoting a just culture, and we'll move through what some of those examples might look like. So when we look at the importance of reporting events, and I'm talking about safety events, and we'll go through the definitions of different types of safety events. High reliability organizations, or HROs, depend on engaged staff that is actively reporting and encouraged to report adverse events and close calls so that we're aiming to improve our organization and the support of the individuals that we serve. It's really important that we are investigating incidents and not people, to better understand what happened. And so that's a key premise of a just culture, is we want to understand the activity, what went wrong, not who did something wrong. Because if we look at it more objectively and look at what went wrong, we gain an increased understanding of how we can address that issue so that it doesn't become more prevalent in the future. It also, HROs encourage learning to support changing behavior or changing the environment, which is the system, or sometimes both. And we'll go through some of those examples of how behavior is implicated versus environment and systems are implicated when it comes to evaluating adverse events. We learn from understanding all of the types of different incidents that should be reported, including close calls, adverse events, and sentinel events. We'll go through those. What are all of those? So a close call, as you might guess, is something, we also call it a near miss. So it's an event or a situation that could have resulted in an adverse event, but it didn't, either by chance or because we caught the mistake before it actually happened. We refer to them as near miss or a potential event. And it's just as important to report a close call or a near miss event of, whoops, I almost made a mistake with administering this medication, but I didn't, because we can learn a lot about what led to that potential to almost create that mistake. Different than an adverse event, which is an incident, an untoward incident, an iatrogenic injury, or other unintended harm directly associated with care or services. So this is an incident that actually occurred. Beyond a near miss, the event actually occurred, but it's in a relatively manageable area of intervention. Versus a sentinel event. The sentinel event is the most extreme of the adverse events that to be reported, but it's most critical that we do get them reported. And that's an occurrence that involves death, serious permanent physical or psychological injury, or severe temporary harm that for which intervention is required. It could be surgery, it could be hospitalization. So if that person requires follow-on treatment as a result of the event, it is considered a sentinel event. And we have some more definitions of what classifies as a sentinel event, and we'll go through some of those. In the VA, we have a very robust system of patient safety event reporting. It's our joint patient safety reporting system. We call it JPSR, and the joint applies to the VA and the Department of Defense, so the DoD. The VA and Department of Defense share the database, and in VA, any staff member at any level of the organization, from the director of the hospital to the frontline staff to anybody involved in the healthcare organization, can enter an event at any time. We are looking to enter those types of events, close call or near misses, actual adverse events, and sentinel events, so that we can analyze the data. So as we gather more information, we're building our network of large data so that we can see what's happening across the network with trends in adverse events and figure out systems improvements to address them. We can mark any particular event, can be tagged by the reporter for national attention. So if an event occurs in a facility and we say, hey, there was water on the floor and somebody slipped and that issue happened, that gets entered as likely a facility event. But if there's a problem with a piece of equipment and that person entering the event says, hey, I know that this particular wheelchair is being used in other locations across the country, they can tag that record for national attention, and then we are able to address it as a national event, which could include gathering information from other facilities, putting together a work group to address the issue if needed. We can also contact the manufacturer or even work with the FDA and other organizations to address a problem that is more, more broad reaching. And so really nice. The other thing that is good in any type of event capture system is giving the reporter the opportunity to either provide their name or not. And so in a just culture, we don't require people to identify themselves when they're expressing a concern. We want them to feel safe in doing so, but they are not required. It's not a required field when entering the event. We'll take the information. We're going to de-identify it by facility and veteran anyway. And so we give that opportunity so that folks are aware that they are functioning in a just culture and that they won't be punished. There's no punitive intervention for reporting an event about yourself or even about another person. Within the event evaluation, and again, not going through all the details, but obviously we're going to capture all of the details that are available. So the location, the time of day, the circumstances, the type of setting where everything took place. We're going to capture all of those details in that record. It's going to be tagged for national attention or not tagged for national attention. And then from there, each event that's entered is assessed individually and as a group of events. And so the first component of that is to assign a safety assessment score or a SAC score. And that is based on the severity of the event and the frequency of the event. So how likely is this situation encountered in a daily basis, on an hourly basis, maybe a weekly basis? So how often is this likely to occur and how severe is the potential outcome? Gives us a SAC score. And so a low scoring SAC score like a 1 is going to kind of be a more minimal issue. We'll keep our eye on that, but we're not too worried, as compared to a SAC 3, which means somebody sustained a significant injury. There was a real problem, medical attention was necessary, and we can take a look at those in a different way. So we can do a root cause analysis to look at those SAC 3 events, and we'll go through some details of root cause analysis. What's really important about that is we assemble a team of people to really dig deep into the information to figure out potential causes of this situation, but more importantly, what were the key root causes that resulted in this adverse event actually being able to happen. And then in some cases, for different types of issues that occur frequently, like falls, we might do an aggregate review. So we look at all of the falls for which RCAs and assessments were performed and roll them up in a period of time for like a quarter, which is 3 months at a time, and look at those in aggregate as a more efficient way to evaluate those. A lot of folks who have received training, especially in engineering school, not so much in clinical professional training, including therapy school. But the engineers have a really strong understanding of root cause analysis. And I really like this graphic from Six Sigma. And you can go through, they have wonderful training materials available on the web and a lot of good graphics available, to demonstrate key points. But what's really important is when you have one of those events that is going to score as a SAC 2 in the middle, or even up to a SAC 3 based on severity and frequency, we're going to identify, we've got to do a root cause analysis on this particular event. We've got to identify what the problem is. We did that in step 1. We scored it. We determined that we need to do the RCA, root cause analysis. We select a team, and it's not just people that are heavily engaged in that particular topic. There's always a value of bringing in team members from administrative work streams, from engineering work streams, from facility work streams, in addition to clinical experts, so that we're getting perspectives of a broad group of different individuals. We collect the information, we collect the data available about this particular incident and about similar incidents. What's amazing about our extensive database is that we can search for similar incidents by keywords. Sometimes we find 1 or 2 similar incidents, sometimes we find thousands. So it depends on what the topic it is, but we're able to assemble the data so that we can review it collectively. We look at the whole list of possible factors that we can identify that might be related to this incident, and we move forward through this step-by-step process to really identify the 1 or 2 root causes that contributed to this adverse event. From there, what's really important is now we have to take the big step forward to implement an action plan. What are we going to do as a team in this organization to address the issue that occurred, and then to monitor the information, the implementation, the action stream, so that over time we can gauge, are we making a difference here, or do we need to make further adjustments along the way to ensure that this adverse event is being mitigated and or managed so that it doesn't occur again in the future. So broad overview of root cause analysis, but it is extremely important in the analysis of patient safety events, whether they are actual events or near miss close calls. So we can actually do this with a close call event as well. How important is, the assessment of patient safety reporting? The Joint Commission issued a Sentinel event alert about 3 years back that was specific to leadership failures related to event reporting. And so the leadership failures identified when it comes to patient safety event reporting, the leadership failure was not encouraging or not supporting the reporting at all, not responding appropriately to the safety problems that were identified, not addressing staff burnout. That patient safety in itself is staff burnout. When people are tired, when people are frustrated, we've seen it, we understand it, especially with dealing with this COVID pandemic. Errors can occur when people are worn out, not surprising at all. Leadership failure, refusing to prioritize and implement the patient safety recommendations that have been recommended by the team working that particular issue, and also allowing intimidation of staff. So that allowing intimidation of staff that are reporting issues is the opposite of a just culture. In a just culture, we encourage reporting, we support the individual addressing the reporting, and we want to have a robust system of analysis so that we can learn from those mistakes instead of hiding them and not choosing to respond to them. So I thought that was an interesting case of the Joint Commission saying this is where leadership has failed in addressing patient safety identified issues. I know that you are all interested in, what are all of the issues that occur in working with wheeled mobility and seating devices? I think that as you look through this list, you won't be surprised. I want you to be thinking about the products that you work with, whether you're a manufacturer, manufacturing your own products, if you're a supplier or distributor and working with a whole variety of different products, if you're a clinician working directly with clients and all of the other team members and making the recommendations about how catastrophic some of these adverse events can be. These are themes. I did not pull up specific numbers. I did not pull up specific locations or people, because these are themes that emerge when we are able to mine our database systems. Falls are not surprising. We see falls occurring with individuals driving powered mobility devices or propelling manual wheelchairs, either with upper extremities, lower extremities, or a combination of those four. Lots of falls occur during transfers. So while an individual is moving from their wheelchair to another surface, or from another surface like the bed or the commode to their wheelchair, is a prime location where falls are occurring, also not surprising. And also falls occurring from or with the wheelchair. And so everyone can envision the individual falling, flipping over backwards, falling sideways out of the chair. And if you can imagine the severity of the event when the individual is secured appropriately in a power wheelchair and falls with the device attached to them. So that is a common theme that we see in the data as well. In terms of the types of injuries, they range from minor to catastrophic, as you might imagine. Skin and tissue injuries, abrasions, bruises, common all day, every day when people are falling or sustaining any type of adverse injury related to their wheeled mobility device. The next level will be fractured, and of course, a fractured femur is a life-threatening event for any of us, let alone somebody who is mobility impaired and using a wheelchair for the majority of their mobility. Traumatic brain injury has been reported when individuals sustain an injury related to using a device. And it might be from a fall, it might be from a vehicle accident, it might be from a variety of different issues, but it's not uncommon for the individual to have their head impact a firm surface, causing a subdermal hematoma or other form of traumatic brain injury. And of course, the worst type of sentinel event is death. And it is really disheartening to review the cases where there is a report of an individual dying as a result of an incident and an adverse event that caused them to be, to lose their life. And so these are kind of, from the minor to the most significant. And of course, there are additional adverse types of events, consequences, I should say, where an individual might end up being stranded as a result of an issue that occurred with their wheelchair. And so worst case, you might be stranded in your home, which is bad, but worst case scenario would be stranded in the community. And we see those types of activities all along. When we look at the range of causes, so what is the cause of these types of issues? This is the range of different items that occur. So the device malfunctions, the device fails completely, a complete stall, battery problem, breakage in any way. We see design challenges where it was a poor design, or I shouldn't say poor design, challenging design for which there can be an implication. That root cause analysis brings it back to the design of the device that was being used. User error. So as we know, people make mistakes and there can be user error associated with using a particular wheeled mobility device or seating system that can contribute to that adverse event. Communication challenges. This is a big one. Communication causes issues. And I think, without identifying specific cases, there are a number of issues where there are communication challenges with individuals getting into and out of a mass vehicle like a van or a bus while using a wheelchair. And so especially when someone's driving a power wheelchair, either with any type of impaired perception or even driving with their head where it's hard to perceive what's going on around you, communication becomes really key about the ramp is employed, the platform lift is employed, it's flat, it's ready for you to drive out or it's not. And again, without sharing specific details, you might imagine the outcome of the reports when an individual exiting a van or a bus thought that the platform was there ready to receive them when it was not, and there was not an obstacle to prevent them from driving right off of the edge of the bus or the van. So really significant injuries can result when that type of adverse event occurs. Of course, there's challenges with perception or judgment by the person driving or pushing the wheelchair. And the most common are going to be obstacles. So the individual turning into or driving into an obstacle that they either didn't perceive or didn't perceive the exact location of. And then the other one, of course, is drop-offs. So we think of platforms or changes in transition locations, curbs, stairs, different types of surface transitions where the drop-off results in a fall with the person either attached to or not attached to their devices. And then another one is just skills training deficits related to using the wheeled mobility device safely. And so when we have a person who's been provided a device and has not been taught or has not demonstrated the ability to use it safely and effectively, they can have an adverse event as a result of the lack of training or education that goes along with that. So, when we look at our data sets, we can pull up all of these different trends and themes. And really nice to see that we also have a series of articles that have been published to demonstrate very consistent findings when studied in a research type setting. So this is a publication back from 2016. And for a number of years, I've referenced this particular study because it provides good information about what's going on. This one was published by a group here from the University of Pittsburgh. Kudos to all of you. We've all worked together for a very long time. In the Archives of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation in 2016, they studied a large number of subjects. 591 subjects is quite robust for this population of wheelchair users. And they looked at repairs that were needed in the past 6 months, finding that almost 64% required at least one repair in the past 6 months. So that's a pretty significant finding. 28% experienced adverse consequences while using their wheeled mobility devices. Again, that's in the past 6 months. 18% of them were stranded as an adverse consequence of that impairment of their wheeled mobility device. And then with power wheelchairs, the electrical power and control systems were impacted, and with manual wheelchairs, those were different, with wheels and casters being impacted there. Fast forward to 2021 and an overlap of these professionals and some others as well that are heavily interested in this topic. 5 years later, we have a publication this year also in the Archives of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, looking at the incidence of wheelchair repairs and consequences amongst individuals with spinal cord injury. And so a similar cohort, they looked at 533 participants that were being served by 9 facilities in the spinal cord injury model system centers. And they, again, looked at the past 6 months. 56% required repairs, so not quite as high as the previous study, but right in there with more than half of people are requiring a repair in the past 6 months. 42% experienced at least one negative consequence of that repair. And the repair rates were highest with the seating system, the electronics, and the tires. In this particular study, Lynn Warby and her colleagues looked at what was the out-of-pocket expenses. The median cost was $150 with the IQR, the interquartile range of $50 to $620 out of pocket for that individual to kind of escape from that need for repair before a repair was available, funded for them. Also interesting to look at the inequities or disparities related to repairs and wheeled mobility devices. This is interesting and important findings that repairs are more common in individuals who are Black or those who use power wheelchairs. And the consequences of those repairs needed are more common in those who are Black, those who use power assist systems, or those who have public insurance. So nice kind of landmark study here to kind of reinforce that in the last 5 years, we still have much of the same issue to address. And a lot of the work being done is targeted in that way. As we look at adverse events of falls, this is another study from several years ago. Laura Rice and colleagues at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, looked at individuals with multiple sclerosis who use wheelchairs and scooters and looked at their incidence of falls. Frightening that 75% reported falling at least once in the past 6 months. So 75% of those people using wheeled mobility devices fell at least once, could have fallen more. 48% or half of them sustained an injury, and 87.5% of the falls occurred in the home. So again, really important information to look about the issues of adverse consequences, in this case, or adverse events, in this case, falls occurring with a population using wheelchairs and scooters is quite striking. And we continue to experience these same types of findings in a number of similar research studies. I wanted to highlight that in January 2021, so exactly 1 year ago, the Joint Commission in the United States, who provides oversight and accreditation of all of our healthcare systems in the United States, revised the definition of falls as sentinel events. And so not every fall is a sentinel event, but there was a key definition revision that really changed how we are addressing falls and evaluating the adverse consequences as a result of the fall. And so the adjustment is a fall resulting in any of the following is going to be classified as a sentinel event or one of the most severe events. And that's a fall resulting in any fracture, requiring surgery, casting, traction, requiring consult management, comfort care, neurologic type of injury with like a skull fracture, that brain injury, the brain damage that we talked about a little bit earlier, any type of internal rib fracture, liver laceration, any type of injury. And then of course, death or permanent harm is going to be classified as a sentinel event. Most of this does not sound surprising to most of you, but the biggest issue is that the capture of any fracture from a fall classifies that particular fall as a sentinel event, means any minor fracture will also be considered a sentinel event. And that means fracture of a finger, fracture of a toe, any hairline fracture is going to automatically move that fall into a sentinel event. And it needs to then be evaluated under the root cause analysis system and or an aggregate review, so that we're really looking closely at what's going on with falls. As we know, this is a tremendous problem in healthcare settings, the transition to home in the United States and in every country across the world. So we are really doing a lot of work to address the problem of falls across the world. And we're looking at avoidance of injuries to patients from care is a patient safety indicator from the Agency for Healthcare Quality Improvement. So really important that we're prioritizing the adverse events of falls as something that we need to be addressing. So I want to move into the next segment here and look at how does the application of human error and human behavior and risk-taking tie into the management of adverse events that occur and the advocacy for patient safety. So back early in about 2001, the Institute of Medicine published this manual titled "To Err is Human, Building a Safer Health System." And there are a lot of key premises in here that really highlight what we are looking at when individuals are functioning in complex systems, including healthcare. And we'll take a look at some of these behaviors. Within the concepts of "to err is human," there are two key paradigms. The first key paradigm is that human error, or to make a mistake, is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and it's inevitable. You can't avoid it. It's a behavior. It's not a behavioral choice. So if I make a mistake, it's not like I woke up in the morning and said, "Hey, today's the day I'm going to make a mistake," but rather it's something that just happens that I'm not thinking about, and before you know it, something has happened that I don't have control over. So it's not my behavioral choice to make a mistake. And nobody is immune from human error or making a mistake. And I'm highlighting in the picture here, this is a car driving away with the fuel pump attached to it because they left the fuel pump in the container, the receptacle, as they drove away from the gas station. I will admit, this is something I have done once in my life. You do it once in your life, you never do it again. I did not intend to do it. It was a snowy, cold, drizzly day up in the mountains, and I was in a rush. So I did that one time. It will never happen again. But if I polled the entire group, I bet at least half of you have experienced something similar to this in your pastime. The second paradigm is drift. And so when we look at drift, we'll go through the behavior, and it's, again, drifting is ubiquitous, meaning it's everywhere and it's inevitable. So we can't avoid it. No person is immune to drift. However, a drift behavior, choosing to drift, is my choice. It's your choice. Very different than human error, which is not a choice. And I think the best way to demonstrate drift is it's kind of looking at, how far away do we deviate from the norm? And so when you see a speed limit sign posted at 70 miles per hour, kilometers per hour, whatever it might be, I want you to pause and think, where do you set your cruise control? Or how fast do you drive? And in your mind, I want you to be thinking, is it 65? Is it 68? Is it 70? Is it 75, 78? Most people, when we're speaking with a live audience, will agree that they set their cruise control above the established speed limit of 70. So the rule is 70. However, we drift because we feel comfortable pushing that rule a little bit. And we feel safe within that context of pushing that particular rule that far. So it's just an example of how we know what the rules are, we know what the standards of practice are, but we drift just a little bit because we feel that we're safe, at least within that zone. When we look at knowing that those two paradigms are true, that human error and drift are unavoidable and are everywhere. It will happen to everyone because no one is immune. We need to build systems that are error tolerant. So if we know that mistakes are going to be made, we know that people are going to make choices, we need to build systems that are tolerant of those kinds of behaviors. This is, it's an old model. It's a Swiss cheese model. If you can envision each of these cards as a piece of Swiss cheese with holes in it. James Reason was the author of his book back in 1990 or so, where he identified that you have all of these different locations of work and locations of implementation. And we know that we have lots of different issues. We have human error, we have distraction, interruptions of noise. Maybe we don't have standardized policies and procedures. I'm afraid because I'm going to get in trouble if I talk about this issue in my facility. We have communication challenges. We have people who are complacent. They haven't been trained in quite some time. They used to be really good, but maybe not so much anymore. And of course, we have technology challenges as well. And when you have all of these systems lining up in just the right way, those issues will line up slice by slice by slice by slice. And you can see that each of those pieces of cheese have to line up in just the right way with all of the behaviors and circumstances supporting that situation in order for a mishap to occur. And so what we're looking at here is a system. If we can design systems that are tolerant of error and block those applications of adverse event from getting through, we have the opportunity to address adverse events both retrospectively and prospectively to mitigate harm. When we look at different types of behavior, really important within this context, with human error, it's an inadvertent mistake, it's a cognitive slip, didn't need to do it, and it's for an outcome that's other than intended, didn't make the choice to do that. At-risk behavior is different. So that's when a competent professional or person, they develop just little unhealthy norms. It's a behavioral choice to take a shortcut, to bend the rules a little bit. I might not see it as a risk, or I might see it as a risk, but it's a risk that I can tolerate. We're going to be okay. That's at risk or risky behavior, which is very different than reckless behavior. So reckless behavior is when an individual or a professional makes a behavioral choice, a conscious choice to disregard substantial and unjustifiable risk. And we'll go through some examples of how these are different. So when we look at, human behavior, human error, at-risk behavior, and reckless behavior, you also have to tie that in to the systems for which we are working in. And this is an examination. After you see this little section of the presentation, you will not be able to walk down the hallway, across an airport, down a mall without looking at everything that could be wrong. Because we're going to look at the combination of behaviors with systems challenges. So this is in a conference center. So if we were all together, we might be in a conference center, and there was an extraordinary amount of reports of people tripping and actually falling as they were passing through this doorway into the next segment of the lobby. And you might look at that and say, it looks a little bit dark, might need more lighting. You have to take a good look around. And if you looked at this area from the other side, you can see the bottom here that there was actually a step down the other side. But because of the transition in carpet and different surfaces, most folks in this low lighted area did not perceive that they needed to step down about a 5-inch transition. And so it was highlighted as a point where we need to make some improvements, because the sign that says, please watch your step, which was this one right here, was not helping enough. And they continue to see different signage being used and no improvements. So we need to redesign the system, perhaps with a ramp, perhaps with a different type of transition to support people to stay upright and safe. Another example is a demonstration that signs often are not helpful. If you look at this picture, you have a bridge ahead, cars only, low clearance, no trucks, no buses. And yet this high truck with cargo has driven past every single sign and crashed into an overhead bridge. So there's a lot of evidence. If you look at the human behavior published literature, signs are often not effective in managing human behavior. Design can be poor. This is one of my favorites, especially for an audience such as this. Out in the middle of nowhere at a ski area in one of my favorite places in Colorado is this accessibly Accessible outhouse. And so you can see that it's marked as accessible. And that is as long as you can traverse through the snow and then step up 3 steps, you can get into the accessible outhouse. So again, design challenges. The structure itself is probably large enough to be tagged as accessible. The door is probably 32 or 34 inches wide. So as long as you can traverse the snow and get up several steps, you're good to go. Poor design as an example. Another couple of quick examples looking at, installations in bathrooms. They can check the box that the grab bar is installed. It's likely not going to be too helpful at the backside of the commode. This is one of my favorites. That's me in the mirror. I have an accessible sink in the women's bathroom, so I can get my wheelchair right up under here. But if I'd like to access the soap dispenser, I need to reach across the 18-inch countertop and up a little bit higher to get to the soap dispenser. Not an ideal design for an accessible sink. When I look at, everyone's encountered this, and how often do you look at these and say, which one is the water and which one is the soap dispenser? And you kind of just wave your hand back and forth, figuring out which one it is. And on the topic of poor design, how many of you have found yourself just kind of waving your hands down the row of many different options in the bathroom, trying to find even one that might dispense either water or soap? You'll take whatever comes out. We look at poor design in hotel signs and labeling. So if you look at this particular one, if you're in room 309 to 331, you go to the right. If you're in 310 to 314, you go to the left. So if I'm in 311, I have no idea where to go, and I'm probably not going to find my room for a while. So just examples, you guys will see these out in the community as well. This might be familiar to some of you. This is an example of the metro in DC, and all of the many steps and colors and options to get a pass to get on the metro in Washington, DC. I personally find this completely overwhelming. Others who are much more adept at public transportation might find this comforting. But you can see that there's a lot of complexity with looking at this type of display, shall we say. In terms of drift, we move towards through time, with the entry point being beginning of a career, beginning of a project, beginning of a new job. Entry point, we're vigilant, we know the rules, we know what we're supposed to be doing. And as time goes by, weeks, months, even years, we drift towards complacency, we drift towards comfort. I know what I'm doing. I don't need to read the manual anymore. I need to be able to just do my job as quickly as possible, get home because I got a lot of stuff going on there, and we drift towards complacency. What's really important is in high reliability organizations that function in a just culture, there is a constant reboot between complacency right back to vigilance. So we go back to vigilance with review, with training, with competency assessment, with continuing education, like this amazing conference that we're all attending together virtually, so that we get right back to vigilance and give ourselves some time to get back on track to avoid adverse events. In terms of why do we drift, there's lots of different reasons that we drift. It can be related to culture. So production pressures, you got to get more work done. Sales pressure, you got to sell more product. So that's going to push me to drift from standards of practice. And also the hierarchy. The boss told me, the worker bee, to manage this in a certain way. A function of time, again, it's complacency with routines. I can do it quicker this way. I've established my own process. And there's always competing priorities. So we have to barter between what we're going to pay more attention to and balance that with tasks and items that get less attention. We're looking at the absence of catastrophe as a feeling of becoming immune to risk. So, hey, I work with a lot of people who use power wheelchairs and nothing bad has ever happened. Is a sense of comfort and a lack of awareness that anything bad could happen at any time. And finally, a lack of training, or probably more common, training, review, and competency updates, so that standards and procedural knowledge get stale and we lose that ability to reboot, review training, review products, review processes, update SOPs, so that we're right back to that vigilance and at the opposite end of complacency. I think what's really important, we've talked a lot today in the plenary sessions opening up ISS and also in several other breakout sessions that all of us have attended, there's a lot of support for innovation in this industry. And what I find is it depends of what the requirements are for the education and training as the innovation advances. And sometimes that's a steep learning curve to figure out, how does this device work? How does the clinical providers, the suppliers, the manufacturers, how do we support our consumers to understand how to use it? What about caregivers and companions? And what about the technical support that's needed to implement the use of that device? And sometimes there's a very detailed, coordinated, complex training system in place to support that education and training, and that needs to be rebooted almost constantly to maintain that competency. And sometimes there's not. And so as we embrace innovation, of course we want to do that. We also want to be mindful of the learning curve that's associated with incorporating that new technology or that emerging technology into our practice. So as we move forward into the final segment, we're just going to talk a little bit about communication, and we're going to talk about communication in addressing adverse events, and it's stop the line for patient safety. We're going to look at, whoops, I'm bouncing around, the 3 W's, and having a communication style that is what I see, what I'm concerned about, and what I want. And that is the opposite of what we call hint and hope communication. So hint and hope communication is, you know, I live in Colorado and there's a lot of snow that piles up, and hint and hope is when I have my young adult children on the premises and we need to get some snow shoveling, and I say, wow, there's a lot of snow out there. I hope we don't get stuck snowed into the garage. When what I really want, you know, I'm concerned about being snowed in the garage. What I really want is, hey, girls, let's work together, get the shovels out, dig out before we get stuck in the garage. Let's do it with A, B, C, and we're going to have it done by 5 p.m. tonight. So the opposite of hint and hoping is what I see, what I want, what I'm concerned about, and what I want. So what I see is a lot of snow. What I want is some teamwork, and we're going to get this done. The same type of thing applies to what we're working with in assistive technology. So when I look at this photo with the transportation issues on the right, what I see, I want to speak up in terms of working with a particular client. When I'm working with a colleague, well, what I see is that you're really providing a different type of device for our long-term client. What I'm concerned about is you may not be accommodating for the fact that he uses public transportation to go everywhere, and I don't see the appropriate configuration of that wheelchair for transportation. And what I want is for us to pause and really make sure that we have all systems in place for this individual to use their new wheeled mobility device safely on a platform lift or a ramp, whatever they're using, with the appropriate securement brackets so that they can be safe while being transported in the vehicle. So really important, what I see, what I'm concerned about, and what I want. We need to have that kind of safe communication in the just culture that we want to work in. In terms of disciplinary action, and these are just the final couple of slides, you know, is the disciplinary action based on the outcome? If I made the same mistake, one person got an abrasion, in another scenario, the person died, same mistake. Based on the outcome, usually no. Do we make disciplinary action based on the rules? Not really, because we can almost always make a justification for bending the rules just a little bit. So that's a tough one. But is it based on risk? Is there a disciplinary action based on the risk that was assumed? And we talked about risky behavior and reckless behavior. And usually the answer is yes. And so if we look at human error, you know, we can make an error with providing medications. And we're running out a little bit of time here. We'll wrap it up. Human error, distributing medications on an inpatient ward. It could also be the same as forgetting to deploy an anti-tip device when an individual is rolling out of the building or out of the door. And so that could be a human error that I didn't intend to do that. I didn't make that choice, but it could result in an adverse consequence. I'm going to say, stop, we've got to correct that. We can look at risk behavior, and that's when the individual is making a choice for that routine rule violation. And so I look at these particular slides in terms of providing wheelchair skills training, whether that's for a power device or for a manual device, and how that individual is going to learn to use their device effectively relies on we as that system and as their team teaching the appropriate wheelchair skills to support them to be safe, and not providing those can demonstrate at-risk and sometimes reckless behavior. When we look at at-risk behavior or risky behavior, at risk, same thing, with that speed limit sign. We already talked about, hey, I'm willing to push the limit. But most people would agree that reckless behavior in a healthcare system might be different. It is deciding not to wash your hands, not wearing the appropriate PPE in an inpatient setting, or not securing a device to the vehicle before using that seat, wheelchair as a seat in a motor vehicle. And so something we need to be aware of, any of these could be determined as reckless behavior, just like we might see driving almost twice the speed limit in any circumstance would easily be determined to be reckless behavior. So the key issues, just in summary, is we went through all of these and we go through this action of step one, what was the type of behavior? Step two, what is the response to the behavior? So with human error, we don't choose the behavior, we don't see the risk, and we're gonna console that person of like, wow, that must be really challenging that you experienced that adverse event. Let's work through that so that we're consoling that person and helping them to understand what happened. For at-risk behavior, we're choosing the behavior. We may or may not see the risk, it depends on the situation, and we're coaching. This is an error that could have been avoided, and we can go through that system to coach so that the person is modifying their behavior so that they don't experience that again. Reckless behavior, we're choosing the behavior, we see the risk, and that is a real problem in healthcare and in working with our clients in wheeled mobility and seating. So step three is also to determine, in any of these scenarios, if 3 other people might have made the same mistake in the same circumstances, it might be a problem with the design of the system, and we might have to make modifications to the system so that others cannot make the same mistake in any of these situations. Usually, reckless behavior is the exception. So, we can go through a whole exercise. In the interest of time, we won't, but you will have copies of the slides to go through. When any of these common situations occur, do these actions, delay of repairs, does that represent risky behavior or reckless behavior? It depends. Allowing a technician or a therapy assistant to practice without supervision could be risky behavior, could be reckless behavior. I've already eliminated that any of these actions are well beyond human error of I didn't know or intend to do anything wrong. So finally, wrapping up, we talked about the 5 characteristics of high reliability organizations, and the real requirement for implementing high reliability and just culture in your everyday work and in your everyday life is to have a leadership commitment, to sustain a culture of safety, and to always be moving towards continuous process improvement to make systems safer so that we can provide safe and reliable care for our clients. So I thank you. I know that we are beyond time to field questions with some of our technical difficulties. We will be able to monitor the chat, and I'll take a look at those questions and get back to each of you one-on-one if there's anything that I can provide. Otherwise, my contact information is provided. I am in the syllabus document, and I'm always happy to discuss these important topics with any and all of you. Thanks so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of ISS. Thanks.
Thanks, Kendra. The code is OR9TR5. It's also in the chat. The code again is OR9TR5. One more time, it's OR9TR5. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your next educational session, and don't forget to join the exhibit hall live for some more demonstrations later this afternoon.
Thank you. I don't know what that is.